guys, 7th here. I know it's been a while. I mentioned this in the last video I made, but I'll just quickly recap. Had a family member that suffered a brain hemorrhage, and it's kept me off of the internet short of being on Twitter. Anyone that's on my friends list on PSN can tell you that I haven't been playing a game for more than 10 or 15 minutes at a time because my whole routine was just thrown out of whack by all this stuff. And it's still not to where it needs to be, but I'm making the effort to try to get back into the habit of posting my videos regularly. So I'll have some game footage tomorrow, and I've got a review of Mortal Kombat X coming up and some other things. I did manage to get The Witcher with last month's or this month's Patreon money, plus some that I had to throw in myself on that one. But of course I haven't gotten to play it enough to really have a review for it yet. So as soon as I get a chance to play, put at least 20 or 30 hours into it where I can give at least a decent review, I will go ahead and make that video too. But I did, since I was going to be making a vid anyway, I thought I might as well address something more current. And I had a chance earlier today to watch Dr. Trey's last video about the Super Nintendo, which, on the one hand is basically 16 minutes of damage control explaining why he never owned one of the most classic NES Nintendo systems. But he does make a couple of valid points. So the real issue there is, well, let's put it this way. His experience is subjective. Just because that's the way that he experienced that generation doesn't make it true for everybody, by any means. So I thought I would counter with my experience from that particular generation in time. Now, I've stated many times that I was a massive fan of the NES. The NES, for the most part, remains my favorite Nintendo console, mainly because of how many games I had on that system that I was just dearly in love with. I just really had a whole lot of games on that system that I adored. But the real reason of that wasn't because of how great the NES was or was not. The main reason was because of Nintendo's licensing policies that prevented great third-party games from being made for the Sega Master System, so the only place they could be released was the NES. So, that's the reason why you never saw Mega Man on Sega Master System, or any of those other great third-party games on Sega Master System, which I have a Sega Master System, and I know. But, to get back to the point, Trey was talking about how parents were different back then, and they were afraid that video games were damaging, and you really had to fight and scrape with your parents to get them to buy. I didn't have any of that experience. And I'll tell you why. My mother was a homemaker. My father was a police officer. Now, back then, police officers didn't even make as much as garbage men do. So you can imagine that there wasn't a whole lot of money floating around anyway for buying video games on a whim. So, I had two basic time frames when I would get games, and that was Christmas time and my birthday, which were both not that far apart. So, and then every 6 months or so, or maybe not that much, maybe every 3 months or so, I'd save up enough in allowance money where I could buy another game. Now, this was for older systems. I'm not talking about Nintendo now. I'm talking about, like, Atari and what was PC back then, which for me was IBM compatible. By the time Nintendo came around, the NES, I was old enough to earn my own money, which I earned money by cutting grass and doing other things like that. So my parents didn't have any effect on that. I went out and bought my NES with my own money. I went out and bought the games that I wanted with my own money that I earned. So, and on top of that, my parents didn't give a crap about me playing video games because they had seen me playing video games from the age of 3 on up, because I'd had hand-me-down consoles right up until the point where they bought me my own 2600 for Christmas one year. I'd had a hand-me-down Magnavox Odyssey 2, a hand-me-down Radio Shack Pong clone, hand-me-down, what was that other one? Oh, the Fairchild Channel F. I had these different hand-me-down systems already, so they hadn't seen any negative impact of me playing those video games, so they had no reservations about me playing anything else. I was an honor student. I was bringing home A's and B's, so they didn't give a crap. So once I got to the point where the NES was a thing, and I wanted it, I cut enough grass to go buy it. And then when I wanted a game, I had money from doing grass cutting and chores and various other things, and I would go and spend it on that. I'd go and paint my neighbor's fence. There's another $50. I'd go and I'd pay and buy me another game with that. And so then, when the Genesis came out, obviously I was impressed by what I saw, but I didn't immediately buy it. I waited about a year, so it was around 1990, and my best friend at the time, he had a Genesis. And we all went on vacation to Disney World one year, and so he brought his Genesis with him, and we sat and played Genesis in the hotel room at night when we weren't out at the parks and whatnot, and I decided I had to have one, so I went out and I bought a Genesis. And from that point on, I was a Sega fanboy, a Sega supporter, all the way up through the end of Sega's hardware aspirations. From the Genesis on, whenever a new console generation started, I bought whatever Sega put out first, and then I'd pick the other ones up later. So I had my Genesis, and then the Super Nintendo came out. Well, by that point, I was a junior in high school working a part-time job at a video store, the video store inside the Farmore store. I don't know if any of you guys remember Farmore. Used to be a thing. It was kind of a low-rent, small version of a Walmart mixed with a pharmacy and a video store. They used to be all over the place. Well, anyway, I worked in the video store at Farmore, and I was working part-time there, junior in high school, and the Super Nintendo came out. Well, I didn't look at the Super Nintendo and say, I've already got a Genesis. I don't need to play Mario. I don't need to play Super Castlevania 4. I don't need to play Super Metroid or Mario Kart or Super Mario RPG or all the Final Fantasy games that were coming out for it. I don't need to play the new Legend of Zelda. I don't need to play Illusion of Gaia or any of the other classic Super Nintendo RPGs that you couldn't get on the Sega Genesis. I can go play all those RPGs over at my friend's house. I'm sure he won't mind me sitting in his floor for 30 to 40 hours to beat the Final Fantasy games. I'm sure that won't be a problem at all. No, I didn't do that. I took my paycheck and I went over and pre-ordered the damn thing. And the launch day, the day the Super Nintendo came out, I left Farmore, drove across the parking lot of Hamilton Place Mall, walked into the electronics boutique, and laid my money down, and I bought one. And every time a new game came out that I wanted for it, I bought it. And then come senior year, when I graduated, my graduation present was the original Sega CD unit. And so that was one thing that I didn't buy myself, because that came from that was my graduation present from my parents. But the point being, my experience differs quite a bit from Trey's because I didn't rely on my parents to give me handouts of games. I went out and I raised the money myself and I bought the shit myself. Now, of course, I'm probably older than Trey by a few years, so it's entirely possible that when the Super Nintendo came out, hadn't even, his balls hadn't even descended yet. I don't know. I don't know how old Trey is. He looks like as old as Montel Williams, so I just assume that's how old he was. But, I could be wrong. He may have still been a little high-pitched motherfucker at the time that the Super Nintendo came out. And, didn't have the ability to go out and earn his own money. I don't know. But that was my experience with it. And was Super Nintendo the best Nintendo system ever? It wasn't in my personal experience simply because I had way more games for the NES. And so I was always fluctuating back and forth between the SNES and the Genesis at that point in time. So my money was being split two ways. And so a lot of the games that were the classic SNES games, I ended up buying cheaper as used titles, rather than buying them new retail, because I was spending more time with my Genesis than I was with my SNES. So it's like I'd beat 3 or 4 games on my Genesis, then I'd go and I'd buy one Super NES game that I really wanted, like, for example, Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past. And then I would play 3 or 4 more Genesis games, and then I'd go back and I'd get Super Metroid. And so that was pretty much the way it was for me. And so when I look back on it, as Trey was trying to say with rose-tinted glasses, when I look back on it, I think of my NES as the best simply because I had way more games for it than I did my SNES at that time. My SNES library eventually got bigger when the Genesis had its downward spiral, and there wasn't really a whole lot coming out for the Sega CD or the 32X, and so I had that 6-month period in early 1995 before the Saturn came out. That actually the day of E3 that 1995. I had all that time where there wasn't really anything on those two systems to get, so I was buying up all the Super Nintendo games that I hadn't gotten over the previous couple of years. And so I eventually amassed a pretty large SNES library, but when I think about when I look back on those times, I remember a lot more of the fun that I had with the NES than the Super Nintendo, because my Super Nintendo experience was somewhat diluted by the fact that I was spending so much time with my Genesis too. Whereas with the NES, that's all I did was play NES, because I didn't have a Master System at that time. I ended up buying it on clearance a couple of years later. So, for me, as on a personal level, the NES is my preference. Was the SNES a better system overall? I would have to say it was. It just took everything that the NES did and expanded on it and made it better. I mean, there's not anybody out there that's going to tell you that the original Castlevania on NES is better than Super Castlevania 4 on the Super Nintendo. Now, there are some that would debate that the original Legend of Zelda is still better than Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past, but I don't think you'll find many that feel that way. Zelda 3 was definitely better than Zelda 2. Good God. The Final Fantasy games on Super Nintendo were vastly superior to the original Final Fantasy. The Mega Man games, that's a little bit more debatable, and that's probably something you'd want to talk to Black Bond about more than me, because I kind of skipped the Mega Man games during the 16-bit era and didn't pick it up again until Mega Man 8 on the Saturn. So, I got as far as Mega Man 6, and then I skipped Mega Man 7, and I skipped most of the Mega Man X series on SNES. I had one of them, I think, but I didn't play it all that much because by that point I was so buried into my Genesis stuff. I was playing stuff like Gunstar Heroes and that kind of thing during that period. But the point being, some of what Trey said is valid, and some of it just kind of comes across more as excuse making. Especially when you got towards where it was getting closer to N64 time and the Super NES 2 came out, he could have gone out and bought a Super NES 2 for next to nothing. And all of those games would have been 1995 or under at that point. So, just saying, well, I already had a Genesis, and then the next generation was coming out. Look, at the end of a generation, that's one of the best times to buy a secondary console, because then you just have this massive, huge library of stuff that you hadn't experienced before, and it's like for you as your personal experience, it's like having a whole new system. I love going out and buying an old console that I didn't get to have during the previous gen, because then I see this, this collection of games that I can choose from to play that I never got to experience before. Like, I never got to own a Vectrex. And, I'd love to have, the $350 it cost me to buy a Vectrex so I can sit and play those games. I had a friend named Brett that lived up the street from me, and he had one, so I got to experience it when it was new, but, only the one or two games that he had. The real reason that Trey didn't have a Super Nintendo is because he didn't want one. That's what it boils down to. He didn't get one because he didn't want one. It doesn't have anything to do with all this bullshit that he brought up about parents who are afraid of kids playing video games. If that was the case, he wouldn't have had his Genesis either. Come on, folks. Come on. He's just throwing excuses out there at that point. And like I said, none of that ever happened with me, and I lived through that whole period. I lived through the whole video games cause violence, and video games affect your schoolwork, which that was what they were saying back in the early 80s with Atari and whatnot. It's, don't let your kids play too many video games, it'll affect their grades. Never affected my grades, never caused me to be any more violent than I naturally am. He didn't get a Super Nintendo because he didn't want one. And the reason he didn't want one was because he was playing his Sega Genesis. And we all know that Trey is big on sports titles. Well, there was nowhere else to go but Genesis when you wanted sports titles. They had it all, and they had the best versions. And it wasn't just because of the fact that that they had separate dedicated development teams for each version. It was also because of the fact that the Genesis, though not having as powerful graphics hardware, ran faster than the Super Nintendo did. So the games played better, they had less lag time, better reaction time with the controllers. That's why the fighting games on the Genesis played better but didn't look as good. That's why the sports games played better but didn't look as good, because it was a faster system and you had less controller to screen lag. That's it. That's all it was. Yes, there were some that had more levels and whatnot put into them, but I can give you just as many examples of Super Nintendo third-party games that were better than the Genesis ones. Is there anyone out there that really wants to argue that Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles: The Hyperstone Heist is better than Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles in Time? Anybody? Show of hands. Anyone that thinks the Genesis Turtles one was better than the Super Nintendo one. Another one, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Tournament Fighters. Is there anyone out there, now this is one fighting game exception, is there anyone out there that really feels the Genesis version of that game was better than the Super Nintendo version of that game? No. So he gave a lot of examples of Super Nintendo third-party games that were inferior to the Genesis versions, and I can give some to you too. Thunder Force 3, one of my absolute favorite Genesis games, it had a sort of half-ass version of it on Super Nintendo called Thunder Spirits, which was actually closer to an arcade port of the arcade version of that game, but that one sucks compared to the Genesis one. There's your one example. So yes, but it also goes both ways. Another example of a fighting game that was better on Super Nintendo than on Genesis would be Clay Fighters. Clay Fighters was kind of a shitty game anyway, but it had a big following back then because we had lowered expectations back then. And the Super Nintendo version was definitely better than the Genesis version. No one is going to try to claim that Castlevania Bloodlines on the Genesis was better than Super Castlevania 4 because it wasn't. No one is going to say that Contra Hardcore on the Genesis was better than Contra 3 The Alien Wars on the Super Nintendo because it wasn't. Different games, same publisher, and they weren't as good, either in graphics or in gameplay. It all boils down to your personal experience. And just because Trey didn't get one doesn't mean that the Super Nintendo wasn't the best Nintendo system ever released. As far as number of exclusives, as far as number of third-party titles, I haven't looked at the numbers on it in a long time, so I'm not sure if the SNES ended up beating the NES in the United States anyway, as far as library size. But as far as the overall quality of the third-party games, as far as the quality of the first-party exclusives, as far as the expanded abilities and the games being larger and being longer and being able to do more with them, and how much bang you got for your buck for it because they kept putting games for it out all the way up until 1996. Yes, I think you could argue that the Super Nintendo is the best system that Nintendo's ever put out. And yes, I can say that, Trey, because I have owned every Nintendo system. All of them. Even Virtual Boy at one point. I've owned them all, and I've played them all. So, from my opinionated point of view, yes, I can say that. I am not someone that you can point to and say, well, he never owned anything prior to this or that. He got the Super Nintendo, and then he became a PlayStation fanboy. I know that's the voice you like to use, so I'm using it. No, I didn't do that because at that point I was playing Saturn. I didn't buy a PlayStation 1 until after the Saturn died. And then I bought the N64 on the same day, in fact, that I bought my PS1. When they ceased production of Saturn, I went out and bought a PS1 and an N64 same day. Cash. And bought about 10 games for each of them. Same day. Cash. Because I could do that. Because I had my own money. And the same thing with the GameCube. And the same thing with the Wii and the Wii U. I've owned them all. And whereas I personally still have more of a fondness in my heart for the NES just because of the era that it was in and the memories that I have from it and the friendships that came with it and all this. And yes, most of my friends had both Genesis and Super Nintendo at the same time as well, Trey, so that kind of shoots that one down too. I will say that overall, the Super Nintendo was the best system that Nintendo has ever released as far as a console goes. Maybe not a handheld, but as a console. And with that, I've talked almost 30 minutes, and I need to get some sleep before I have to go into work. So I'm going to bid you all adieu. I will have some kind of a gameplay video up tomorrow, and hopefully I'll have my review of Mortal Kombat X ready by Friday. This is 7th.